At my sister-in-law's extravagant wedding, my mother laughed into the microphone and told 200 guests that I was not married but I was good for a check. Everyone laughed, assuming I was just the bitter, lonely sister. My name was not even in the wedding program. So I stood up, took the microphone from her hands, and canceled the entire reception right in front of them. My name is Lauren. I am 34 years old and somehow still untangling myself from a family that only saw me as a walking bank account. As the quiet founder of a highly successful private equity firm, I built my wealth in the shadows far away from their toxic expectations. I escaped their control years ago, but I still maintained occasional contact out of a misplaced sense of duty. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Growing up in a wealthy suburb, my brother Ryan was always the golden child while I was the invisible workhorse. Fast forward to last Saturday night, inside the grand ballroom of the city's most expensive luxury hotel. The crystal chandeliers sparkled above towering floral arrangements of imported white roses. I had quietly paid $120,000 to save this wedding after Ryan completely ruined his budget on terrible investments. I sat at a small corner table sipping my sparkling water, watching his beautiful new bride Jasmine glowing in her custom designer gown. Jasmine is a stunning African-American woman who always made sure I knew my place. She constantly treated me like the pathetic spinster sister who should be grateful just to be allowed in her presence. The massive room grew quiet as my mother Brenda tapped her champagne glass and walked up to the stage. She took the microphone, wiping a perfectly timed fake tear from her eye. She spent 5 solid minutes praising Jasmine, calling her the beautiful daughter she always wanted and the perfect addition to our flawless family. Then her eyes locked onto my table in the dimly lit corner. A cruel, familiar smirk spread across her face. She leaned closely into the microphone. "You know, everyone, let us give a special round of applause for Lauren down there. She might not have a husband, and Lord knows she is not getting any younger, but at least she is a very good ATM for the family." The entire ballroom erupted in loud laughter. 200 elegant guests, including Jasmine's entire extended family, turned to look at me with a mix of pity and pure amusement. I looked down at the expensive gold foil wedding program resting on my table. My name was not printed anywhere inside it. There was no special thanks and no sister of the groom title. I was just a punchline for them to enjoy. My mother stood there on the stage, basking in the cruel laughter, expecting me to shrink down in my seat and cry. She expected me to swallow the deep humiliation, because that is exactly what I had done my entire life. She had absolutely no idea that the woman sitting quietly at that table was no longer the frightened little girl she raised. I placed my linen napkin on the table, stood up, and smoothed out my dress. I sat perfectly still as the cruel laughter echoed around the grand ballroom. My fingers tightened around the stem of my crystal water glass so hard I thought the glass might actually shatter in my hand. I looked down again at the heavy cream-colored paper of the wedding program resting next to my dinner plate. There were 2 full pages dedicated to thanking important family members. They thanked Jasmine's parents for their endless love. They thanked my mother Brenda for her unwavering support. They even included a special written tribute to Ryan's golden retriever. But my name was nowhere to be found. It was as if I simply did not exist. I took a slow, deep breath and let the cold, heavy reality wash over me. Just 3 months ago, my older brother Ryan had come to my apartment practically in tears. He had foolishly gambled away his entire wedding budget on a disastrous cryptocurrency scheme that he swore was going to make him a billionaire overnight. He begged me to help him, saying Jasmine would cancel the wedding if she found out he was completely broke. Against my better judgment, I quietly transferred exactly $120,000 to cover the luxury venue, the gourmet catering, the imported roses, and the live band. I did it because I was exhausted by the constant family drama and just wanted peace. I asked for absolutely nothing in return. But instead of being grateful, Jasmine used my silence as a weapon. Every time we crossed paths during the wedding planning, she made sure to remind me of my inferior place. When I politely offered to help with the reception seating chart, she rolled her eyes and told me to just stick to my boring accounting spreadsheets. She absolutely loved calling me the pathetic spinster accountant who desperately needed to get a life. She had completely convinced herself that I was just a sad, lonely woman counting pennies in a tiny cubicle somewhere. She had no idea that my private equity firm had recently acquired the massive commercial plaza where she worked as a junior marketing assistant. Ryan never told his bride where the wedding money actually came from. He proudly let her believe he had suddenly hit it big on a brilliant secret investment. And my mother was more than happy to play along with the ridiculous lie because admitting her golden boy was a financial failure would destroy her perfect social image. So there I was, sitting quietly at a dark table in the back corner, literally paying for the exact microphone my mother was currently using to publicly humiliate me. The loud laughter in the room finally started to die down, but my mother was still grinning from the stage, eagerly waiting for my reaction. She fully expected me to look down in total shame and quietly accept the abuse like I always did. Instead, I slowly released my tight grip on the water glass. I picked up my silk clutch from the empty chair next to me and stood up straight. The time for keeping the peace was officially over. The heavy silence in the room was deafening as I pushed my chair back and stepped away from my lonely corner table. Every single pair of eyes watched my every move. The clinking of fine silver forks against expensive china stopped completely. The only sound echoing across the grand ballroom was the sharp, confident click of my heels against the polished marble floor. I kept my posture perfectly straight and my chin held high. I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing a single tear. I walked past several tables filled with Jasmine's relatives who were still chuckling softly to themselves. I walked right past my brother Ryan, who was sitting at the beautifully decorated sweetheart table. He had a deeply confused look on his face. He leaned over to whisper something to his new bride, but Jasmine just crossed her arms and glared at me with pure annoyance. They all fully assumed I was walking toward the exit to go hide and cry in my car. That was the role I was always supposed to play in this family. But I did not turn toward the heavy oak doors at the back of the room. Instead, I walked directly toward the brightly illuminated stage where my mother was still standing. Her smug, satisfied smile began to falter slightly as I climbed the short set of carpeted stairs. She gripped the microphone a little tighter, perhaps thinking I was coming up to publicly beg for her approval. She hissed quietly under her breath, making sure the audience could not hear her over the sound system. She ordered me to go sit back down right now before I embarrassed myself and ruined my brother's special day. I did not say a single word to her. I simply stepped right into her personal space and firmly wrapped my hand around the stem of the microphone. For a split second, she tried to yank it away from me, but I gave her a look so incredibly cold and full of pure authority that her fingers instinctively loosened. I pulled the microphone smoothly from her grasp, leaving her standing there empty-handed and utterly shocked. I turned my back to my mother and faced the sea of 200 wide-eyed guests. The room was so incredibly quiet you could actually hear the gentle hum of the air conditioning. I looked directly at the sweetheart table where Ryan was now sitting up, totally rigid, sensing that something was terribly wrong. Then I brought the microphone up to my lips. My voice was completely steady without a single trace of sadness or hesitation. "You are absolutely right, Mom," I said, letting my clear, calm words ring out through the massive speakers. "I am incredibly good at writing checks for this family." I paused for just a second, locking eyes with my brother, whose face had suddenly drained of all color. "And as you are all about to find out, I am also very good at canceling them." I reached into my silk designer clutch and slowly pulled out my cell phone. The room was so incredibly still that you could actually feel the collective breath being held by 200 people. I unlocked the bright screen and opened my secure banking application, tapping the direct 24-hour line to my private wealth management team. I pressed the speakerphone button and held the device right up to the microphone so that every single guest in the grand ballroom could hear exactly what was about to happen. The phone rang only twice before a crisp, highly professional voice echoed loudly through the massive speakers. "Good evening, Miss Lauren. This is the VIP Client Services Desk. How may I assist you tonight?" I kept my cold eyes locked directly on my brother Ryan, who was now practically shaking at his beautifully decorated sweetheart table. "Good evening," I replied smoothly, keeping my voice perfectly steady. "I need to issue an immediate stop payment and initiate a full chargeback on a massive transaction made exactly 3 days ago. The amount is exactly $120,000 paid directly to the Belmont Plaza Luxury Hotel." I could hear the loud collective gasp ripple through the sea of wedding guests. Jasmine's parents looked at each other in total shock. My mother Brenda lunged forward, her face twisting in sheer absolute panic. She desperately reached for the microphone again, but I easily took a step back, keeping it far out of her grasp. The bank representative spoke again, her voice crystal clear over the expensive sound system. "Certainly, Miss Lauren. I see the transaction right here. May I ask the specific reason for this sudden cancellation?" "Yes," I said, my voice completely void of any warmth or emotion. "The beneficiary has fundamentally violated the basic terms of our agreement. The expected respect and services were absolutely not rendered as promised, and I am completely withdrawing my financial sponsorship of this entire event, effective immediately. Please lock down the vendor payments and authorize the complete reversal." "Understood, Miss Lauren," the representative replied efficiently. "The massive charge of $120,000 has been officially flagged for immediate reversal. Your private wealth account is now completely locked from any further vendor withdrawals for this event. The hotel management will be notified by our automated system in approximately 2 minutes. Is there anything else you need tonight?" "No, that will be absolutely all," I said. "Have a wonderful evening." I ended the call and calmly slipped the phone back into my purse. The silence that followed was incredibly heavy and completely suffocating. My mother was frozen like a statue on the stage, her mouth hanging open but no words coming out. She finally realized that her cruel little joke had just cost her precious golden boy the most important and expensive day of his life. Ryan was gripping the edges of his table so hard his knuckles were stark white. Jasmine looked absolutely furious, her eyes darting between Ryan and me, clearly trying to figure out how the boring spinster sister had the ultimate power to instantly destroy her perfect luxury wedding. I looked at my mother one last time. "You wanted everyone to know I was just the family bank," I said quietly into the microphone. "Well, consider your account permanently closed." I set the heavy microphone down on the wooden podium. I turned around and slowly walked down the stage stairs, leaving them all to deal with the massive financial disaster they had just brought upon themselves. As I walked gracefully back down the carpeted steps, my heels clicked against the floor, but that was the only sound in the entire ballroom. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw David, the senior event manager for the hotel. He was a tall, distinguished man who had been hovering near the kitchen doors all evening, ensuring everything was perfect. Suddenly, his hand flew up to the small radio earpiece tucked discreetly behind his right ear. I watched his professional smile completely vanish. It was instantly replaced by a look of sheer panic and immediate urgency. The automated cancellation alert from my wealth management firm had officially hit their system. David briskly stepped out from the shadows and marched directly toward the stage. He did not even look at my mother, who was still standing there paralyzed with absolute shock. Instead, he looked up at the balcony where the expensive 12-piece string orchestra was preparing to play the first dance song. David crossed his arms and gave them a sharp slashing motion across his throat. The beautiful romantic music screeched to an awkward and painfully abrupt halt. A few cello strings whined sadly before the room plunged back into a total dead silence. Less than 10 seconds later, the magical atmosphere of the grand ballroom was completely shattered. The warm, soft golden spotlights that beautifully illuminated the floral centerpieces suddenly snapped off. In their place, the hotel staff flipped on the harsh, bright white overhead maintenance lights. It was the kind of cold, sterile lighting they only use when it is time to vacuum the carpets and kick everyone out. The sudden blinding glare illuminated every single flaw in the room, including the terrified expressions on the faces of Ryan and Jasmine. Before anyone could even process what the lighting change meant, the heavy double doors to the kitchen swung wide open. A small army of waiters and waitresses marched out in perfect unison. But they were not carrying the expensive main course that Ryan had bragged so much about to his friends. Instead, they began rapidly swarming the guest tables with large plastic clearing tubs. "Excuse us, ladies and gentlemen," the waitstaff murmured quietly but firmly as they began snatching up the half-eaten appetizers and the expensive crystal champagne flutes right out of the guests' hands. A loud wave of murmurs and confused gasps swept through the crowd. The wealthy relatives of Jasmine looked deeply offended as a waiter politely but swiftly pulled a silver bread basket right off their table. The illusion of Ryan's massive fake wealth was evaporating right in front of their eyes in real time. The luxurious dream wedding was being dismantled piece by piece. My mother finally unfroze and practically threw herself off the stage running toward David. She started screaming at him, demanding to know what on earth he was doing. David just stood there with his hands clasped firmly behind his back, completely unfazed by her loud tantrum. He simply informed her that the venue had not been paid for and the event was officially terminated. The reality of the situation finally hit Jasmine like a brick wall. The elegant facade she had worked so hard to maintain all evening instantly shattered. She pushed her chair back so violently that it crashed onto the marble floor behind her. She gathered up the heavy layers of her custom designer gown and stomped off the elevated sweetheart stage. Her face was twisted with absolute rage as she marched straight toward me. The sweet, innocent bride routine was completely gone. In its place was the terrifying anger of a woman who just realized her expensive fairy tale had been built on a lie. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at my face and started screaming so loudly that her voice echoed off the high ceilings. "You jealous, pathetic little witch!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with fury. "You just could not stand to see someone else be happy for once in your miserable, lonely life, could you? You had to ruin my special day because you know no man will ever look at you the way Ryan looks at me." I stood completely still and let her hurl every nasty insult she could think of. I did not flinch or back away. I just looked at her calmly, noticing how her expensive makeup was starting to run down her face from the heat of her anger. The more she screamed, the more unhinged she looked. And the best part was that her entire family was watching her melt down in real time. Over at the tables reserved for the bride's family, the quiet, confused murmurs were rapidly turning into loud, angry arguments. Jasmine's father, a strict, no-nonsense man who owned a successful chain of hardware stores, stood up and glared fiercely at Ryan. The man had contributed absolutely nothing to the wedding budget because Ryan had arrogantly insisted he was wealthy enough to cover everything himself. Now Jasmine's father was realizing his new son-in-law was nothing but a fake, a man who had to beg his sister for money just to pay for a hotel ballroom. Ryan was still frozen at his table, looking like a terrified little boy who had just been caught stealing candy. He tried to stand up and say something to calm down his new father-in-law, but the older man simply raised a hand and turned his back on him in pure disgust. Several of Jasmine's aunts and uncles were already grabbing their coats and purses, refusing to stay another minute in a venue where they were actively being kicked out by the waitstaff. My mother was still frantically arguing with David, the hotel manager, pleading with him to give her just 1 hour to find the money. But David was a true professional. He calmly signaled for the hotel security team. 4 large men in dark suits stepped into the room and began politely but firmly directing the angry, confused guests toward the exit doors. The grand, luxurious wedding I had paid for was now officially dead. The string quartet had packed their instruments. The champagne was gone. The only thing left was the harsh glare of the overhead lights and the reality of Ryan's massive financial failure. I turned around and began walking toward the lobby doors, leaving the screaming bride and my terrified family behind me. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the hotel lobby and stepped out into the cool, crisp night air. The valet immediately recognized me and signaled for my vehicle to be brought around. I stood under the massive glowing awning, taking a deep breath for the first time all evening. My sleek black luxury sedan pulled up smoothly to the curb. I tipped the valet generously and slipped into the plush leather driver's seat, locking the doors immediately. The silence inside my car was incredibly peaceful compared to the circus I had just left behind. Just as I pressed the engine start button, the hotel lobby doors violently burst open. My brother Ryan came sprinting out into the circular driveway. He was sweating heavily, and his expensive tailored tuxedo jacket was completely ruined. He looked absolutely unhinged. He ran straight toward my vehicle, screaming my name, demanding that I get out and fix the massive financial mess I had just created. He slammed his heavy fists against my tinted driver's side window. The sudden loud thud startled the valet staff, but I just sat there perfectly calm. He grabbed the door handle and yanked on it frantically, trying to force his way inside my car. Before he could strike the glass a second time, two large hotel security guards rushed out from the lobby. They grabbed Ryan by the shoulders and forcefully pulled him away from my vehicle. Ryan kicked and struggled like a spoiled child throwing a massive public tantrum, but the trained guards easily pinned his arms to his sides. He shouted that I was ruining his life and that I owed him this luxury wedding. I just stared at him through the glass, feeling absolutely nothing but pity for the weak man he had become. A few seconds later, my mother Brenda came storming out of the hotel. Her hair was messy, and her face was flushed red with pure toxic anger. Seeing the security guards restraining her precious golden boy, she turned all of her furious energy directly toward my car. She pointed a shaking finger at me and began screaming at the top of her lungs so everyone in the parking lot could hear her. She yelled that I was completely dead to her from this moment forward. She screamed that first thing tomorrow morning she was calling her lawyer to permanently remove my name from the family trust fund. She swore to me that I would never see a single penny of the family inheritance and that I would end up completely broke and alone. She stood there panting heavily, fully expecting me to panic and beg for her forgiveness. She honestly believed that the dusty old family trust fund was her ultimate weapon to control my life. I slowly lowered my window just a few inches. I did not yell back or try to explain anything. I simply looked my mother directly in the eyes and gave her a cold, dismissive smirk. Then I rolled the window back up, put the car in drive, and smoothly pressed the gas pedal. I glided out of the hotel driveway, leaving my screaming mother and my restrained brother in the rearview mirror. The drive back to the city was the most relaxing 30 minutes I have had in months. The angry voicemails from my mother and my brother started pouring in almost immediately. My phone screen lit up repeatedly on the dashboard, but it was securely connected to the car Bluetooth on silent mode. I did not care at all. Let them scream into the void. I pulled into the secure underground garage of my luxury high-rise building located right in the heart of the downtown financial district. The night security guard stood up and waved respectfully as the heavy metal gates closed behind me, completely shutting out the chaos of the outside world. I stepped into the private glass elevator and swiped my encrypted access card, taking me directly up to the top-floor penthouse. As I walked into my massive living room, the floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the sparkling city skyline. This was my true sanctuary. For years, my family absolutely loved to mock my career. They honestly believed I was just a low-level corporate accountant who spent her miserable days pushing numbers in a depressing little gray cubicle. My mother constantly bragged about the sacred family trust fund, holding it over my head like a massive golden prize that I desperately needed to behave and beg for. The absolute hilarious truth was that her precious family trust fund was barely worth $500,000. Meanwhile, the private equity firm that I secretly founded and built from the ground up currently manages over $2 billion in luxury commercial real estate assets. I am not a boring little accountant. I am the chief executive officer and the majority shareholder of a massive financial empire. I poured myself a glass of incredibly expensive red wine and sat down on my custom white leather sofa. I thought about the ridiculous threat my mother screamed at me in the hotel parking lot. She genuinely believed that cutting me out of her mediocre inheritance would somehow destroy my entire future. She had absolutely no idea that my firm personally purchased the very building her elite country club operates in. I could literally buy her entire suburban neighborhood and turn it into a commercial parking lot without even checking my bank balance. I had kept my massive wealth a complete secret from my family for one very specific reason. When I was exactly 22 years old, my parents aggressively forced me to take out massive student loans under my own name, just so they could afford to buy Ryan a brand new sports car for his college graduation. They manipulated my young mind, telling me that family always sacrifices for each other. It took me 5 brutal years of working 80-hour weeks to climb out of that crushing debt and begin building my own fortune. From that day forward, I made a silent vow that they would never see a single dime of my real money. I let them see the boring little accountant character because it kept their greedy hands out of my actual accounts. Tomorrow morning, they were going to learn just how powerful the invisible sister really was. I woke up the next morning feeling more rested than I had in years. The morning sun was pouring through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse. I walked into my pristine kitchen and slowly brewed a cup of expensive dark roast coffee, enjoying the absolute quiet. I had slept completely soundly without a single ounce of guilt. After taking my first warm sip, I finally picked up my cell phone from the marble counter. I had left it on silent mode all night long. The screen immediately lit up with over 100 missed calls and countless angry text messages. My mother had left 10 separate voicemails, screaming about how I had completely destroyed the family reputation. But the real entertainment came from my brother Ryan. He had sent me a massive wall of frantic text messages, starting around 4 in the morning. I leaned against the counter and read them with a calm smile. Ryan and Jasmine had somehow managed to pack their bags and head to the international airport for their luxury 2-week honeymoon to the Maldives. Ryan had proudly booked 2 business-class tickets using the same credit card information I had given him for the wedding venue. He honestly thought that I would only cancel the hotel and leave the expensive vacation untouched. His text messages painted a perfect picture of their current disaster. They had marched up to the priority check-in desk, completely expecting to be treated like royalty. Instead, the airline agent coldly informed them that their booking had been permanently canceled. When my wealth management team froze all vendor payments tied to the wedding event, the automated system also flagged and canceled the airline tickets. The agent told them they would need to provide a new form of payment immediately if they wanted to board the plane. The total cost for 2 last-minute international business class tickets was over $15,000. Of course, Ryan did not have $15,000. His bank accounts were completely drained from his failed cryptocurrency investments. According to his furious text messages, Jasmine had thrown a massive screaming fit right in the middle of the busy terminal. She demanded that Ryan fix the problem and buy the tickets, but his credit cards were all declined at the counter. They were forced to drag their heavy, expensive luggage away from the desk, while hundreds of other travelers watched them in total embarrassment. Jasmine was currently sitting on the airport floor, refusing to speak to him. Ryan was begging me to quickly unfreeze the card just so they could get on the plane and save their honeymoon. He promised he would pay me back someday. I took another slow sip of my coffee. I did not reply to a single message. I simply deleted the entire conversation and walked over to enjoy the beautiful morning view of the city. They were finally learning the true cost of their arrogance. Dui day là nôi dung kit ban tiếp theo. Phân đoạn 10 bằng tiếng Anh được tối ưu hoàn toàn cho giọng đọc AI không chứa dấu câu đặc biệt và bám sát mạch truyền ban yêu cầu. Around 10 o'clock that morning, my secure building intercom gently chimed. It was Thomas, the head concierge at the front desk of my luxury high-rise. His usually calm and professional voice sounded incredibly strained. He informed me that my brother and his new wife had just stormed into the elegant lobby, dragging their heavy luggage behind them. They had apparently taken a very expensive cab ride all the way back from the airport after being denied their flights. Now, they were currently screaming at the building security staff, demanding to be let up to my private penthouse. I walked over to the smart security monitor mounted on my wall and pulled up the live high-definition camera feed from the main lobby. The sight was absolutely pathetic. Ryan was pacing back and forth across the polished marble floor, furiously kicking his own expensive leather suitcase. Jasmine was leaning against the reception desk, looking completely disheveled. Her designer travel outfit was heavily wrinkled, and her makeup was totally ruined from her massive temper tantrum at the airport terminal. I pressed the intercom button and calmly instructed Thomas to deny them entry under any circumstances. I told him that if they refused to leave the private premises immediately, he was fully authorized to call the city police and have them escorted out for trespassing. But Jasmine was not going to give up that easily. Through the crystal clear security camera, I watched her suddenly reach into her designer handbag and pull out her cell phone. She quickly adjusted her messy hair, wiped her face to look perfectly tragic, and held the phone up high in front of her. She was starting a live video broadcast right there in the middle of my building lobby. I immediately opened a blank account on my tablet and tuned into her public social media page. Sure enough, there she was crying perfectly timed fake tears for her thousands of online followers. She stared directly into the camera lens, playing the ultimate innocent victim. She sobbed heavily and told her audience that her beautiful luxury wedding had been completely destroyed by her rich, evil, and incredibly jealous sister-in-law. She claimed that I had maliciously canceled their venue and their expensive honeymoon flights simply because I was a bitter, unmarried woman who hated seeing other people find true love. She begged her followers to share the video and help her get justice against my terrible cruelty. Ryan quickly stepped into the camera frame, putting his arm around his crying bride and looking completely devastated. He told the viewers that I had financially abused him for years and that I had stolen his rightful family inheritance. The live viewer count was rapidly climbing by the second. Hundreds of angry comments were flooding the screen, calling me a monster and demanding my full name so they could ruin my career. Most people would have panicked seeing a viral hate campaign forming against them, but I just sat on my custom leather sofa and took a clear screenshot of the broadcast. By publicly spreading these massive, vicious lies to thousands of strangers, Jasmine was handing my corporate lawyers the exact evidence we needed for a massive defamation lawsuit. I simply closed the application and went back to drinking my coffee. I walked away from the security monitor in my living room and stepped into my private home office. I opened my sleek laptop and initiated a secure high-definition video conference with my lead corporate attorney, Mitchell. He was already sitting at his massive mahogany desk looking perfectly calm and wearing his usual sharp-tailored suit. I did not even bother mentioning the ridiculous live video broadcast that Jasmine was currently filming down in my lobby. Mitchell had an entire team of highly paid legal assistants who strictly monitored social media for any mention of my name or my company. He already knew all about her pathetic online temper tantrum. "Good morning," Lauren Mitchell said with a slight professional smile. "I see your brother and his lovely new wife are putting on quite a show downstairs this morning. My team has already recorded and archived the entire broadcast. Her little acting performance is going to make our future defamation case incredibly easy to win in front of a judge." I nodded and took a slow sip of my coffee. "Let them cry for the internet," I said, keeping my voice completely relaxed. "I want to talk about the primary asset right now. Do we have the paperwork ready to execute?" Mitchell adjusted his glasses and pulled a thick physical file folder to the center of his desk. He opened it and carefully took out a single piece of heavy paper. It was the exact document I had asked Ryan to sign 3 months ago when he came crying to my apartment begging for the wedding money. At the time, Ryan was so desperate for the cash that he did not even bother to read a single line of the fine print. I had casually told him it was just a standard internal tax form that my boring accounting department needed to legally transfer such a massive amount of money to a family member. Because he firmly believed I was just a lowly corporate worker pushing papers all day, he grabbed a pen and scribbled his name at the bottom without asking a single question. He was so eager to take my money and play the wealthy bachelor that he completely ignored the basic rules of finance. But it was not a standard tax form at all. Mitchell tapped his expensive fountain pen against the signed paper. "This is a fully executed and legally binding secured promissory note," Mitchell explained, his voice dripping with professional satisfaction. "By signing this document, your brother officially agreed that the $120,000 was absolutely not a family gift. It was a strict personal loan. And more importantly, he agreed to extremely specific repayment terms. Because the wedding event was officially canceled, the entire principal amount plus all accumulated penalty interest is now immediately due in full." I looked at the digital image of Ryan's messy signature on my computer screen. He was so incredibly arrogant, and so completely blinded by his own greed. that he voluntarily handed me the ultimate legal weapon on a silver platter. He honestly thought he could just take my hard-earned money, allow his wife and mother to insult me in public, and walk away without any real consequences. He thought the rules did not apply to him, because he was the golden child. Initiate the formal collection process. I told Mitchell, my voice completely cold and unwavering. I want the official demand letter printed and sent to his registered address today. Give him exactly 7 days to return my money. Mitchell nodded deeply, noting the strict instruction on his yellow legal pad. Consider it done, Lauren, he said. The trap is officially closed. Mitchell leaned closer to the camera, his expression turning sharp and completely focused. The beauty of this specific document is not just the strict repayment schedule, he explained, tapping the heavy paper. It is the collateral clause hidden right inside the standard legal jargon. Your brother was so desperate to impress his new bride that he legally pledged substantial physical assets to guarantee this massive loan. I smiled, feeling a deep sense of absolute control. When Ryan came to my apartment begging for the cash, he spent an entire hour bragging about his brilliant business mind. He told me that his new tech startup was on the verge of making millions, and that he just needed this expensive wedding to look perfectly wealthy for Jasmine's high society family. He was so incredibly arrogant that he literally signed away his entire life without reading a single paragraph. He assumed I was too stupid to actually draft a binding legal contract. He thought I just downloaded some generic family tax form from the internet. He even made a cruel joke while holding the pen, telling me that I should really try to find a husband instead of worrying so much about boring accounting paperwork. I had just smiled quietly and handed him the clipboard. Instead, my top corporate lawyers spent 3 solid days carefully crafting that exact document. It is a bulletproof, secured promissory note. It gives my firm the absolute legal right to seize his designated assets the very second he defaults on the payment. And because the wedding reception was officially canceled due to his complete breach of our agreement, the default clause has already been aggressively triggered. He has exactly 7 days to wire $120,000 directly into my holding account. Mitchell confirmed, typing rapidly on his sleek keyboard. If the money is not completely cleared by next Friday, at exactly 5 in the afternoon, we will immediately file the lien against his collateral. The city court will freeze everything he possesses. He will not be able to buy a simple cup of coffee, let alone finance a luxury lifestyle, or maintain his fake image of being a highly successful young entrepreneur. I stood up from my desk and walked over to the massive window looking down at the busy city streets far below. Down there somewhere, my brother and his furious new wife were still throwing a pathetic public tantrum, trying to ruin my reputation on social media. They honestly thought they were winning the war by playing the innocent victims for a bunch of strangers online. They had absolutely no idea that the real battle was already over and they had completely lost. Send the official demand letter via certified mail, I instructed Mitchell, keeping my gaze fixed on the city below. I want a signature required upon delivery. I want him to look the courier right in the eye when he accepts his financial ruin. Make sure my mother receives a formal legal copy as well. She needs to understand exactly what her precious golden child has done to himself. Consider it done, Mitchell replied, his voice full of pure professional efficiency. The legal collection process is now officially active. I closed the laptop and took a deep, quiet breath. The perfect trap had finally snapped shut. 2 days later, the situation escalated from a public temper tantrum to an incredibly pathetic attempt at legal blackmail. I was sitting in my private office, reviewing the quarterly earnings for my commercial real estate portfolio, when a new email popped into my personal inbox. The subject line was written in all capital letters, demanding my immediate and urgent attention. I clicked open the message and leaned back in my custom leather chair, completely amused by what I was reading. My mother, Brenda, had apparently scoured the internet to find the cheapest and most desperate online lawyer available. The electronic letterhead belonged to a generic strip mall attorney who probably specialized in minor traffic tickets and petty neighborhood disputes. The email was a bizarre mix of a formal cease and desist letter and a completely ridiculous extortion demand. The document stated that I had intentionally inflicted severe emotional distress upon Jasmine during the wedding reception. The poorly written paragraphs claimed that my sudden financial withdrawal had caused Jasmine to suffer massive public humiliation, extreme mental anguish, and deep psychological trauma that would require years of expensive therapy. But the absolute best part of the email was the final demand at the very bottom. This amateur lawyer, working strictly on my mother's angry instructions, boldly demanded that I immediately wire $200,000 directly to Jasmine's personal bank account. They called it a fair and reasonable settlement for her emotional damages. The letter explicitly stated that if the massive sum of money was not deposited within 48 hours, they would take the entire story straight to the national media. They threatened to call the newspapers and expose me as a cruel, greedy, and incredibly toxic woman who maliciously ruined her own brother's life out of pure jealousy. They honestly believed that the threat of a public scandal would completely terrify me into emptying my bank accounts. I read the entire email twice, just to make sure I was not hallucinating the sheer stupidity of their plan. My mother actually thought she could bully a seasoned private equity executive with a copied and pasted legal threat she probably found on a discount website. She assumed that because I was always the quiet and obedient daughter growing up, I would instantly cave under the pressure of a potential media leak. She completely failed to realize that highly successful financial leaders do not ever negotiate with amateur extortionists. I immediately forwarded the ridiculous email to my lead attorney, Mitchell. My secure office phone rang less than a minute later. Mitchell was actually chuckling when I answered the call. He told me that the extortion demand was so incredibly poorly drafted that it basically served as a signed written confession of illegal blackmail. By putting their aggressive threat in writing and tying it directly to a massive financial demand, my mother and Jasmine had officially crossed the line from a bitter family dispute into a serious criminal offense. I told Mitchell to completely ignore their amateur email. We were not going to lower ourselves to argue with a desperate lawyer. We were simply going to let the countdown clock on Ryan's massive loan continue to tick down towards zero. They thought they were holding all the cards, but the real legal hammer was about to drop on them very soon. By noon the next day, the ridiculous video Jasmine recorded in my lobby had completely exploded across the internet. I was sitting at my desk reviewing an acquisition contract when my secure phone buzzed with a message from Mitchell. He had sent me a direct link to the social media platform. Jasmine's pathetic crying performance had somehow been picked up by a massive gossip account, and the video was currently sitting at over 3 million views. The comment section was an absolute nightmare of angry strangers demanding justice for the poor, innocent bride. They were calling me a jealous, evil corporate monster who hated seeing true love succeed. Some internet detectives had already started trying to dig up my personal information to figure out where I worked so they could try to get me fired. They had absolutely no idea that I literally owned the entire company, and there was no manager they could complain to. My own mother had even left a long dramatic comment under the video publicly disowning me and begging her friends to pray for her poor, heartbroken son. Just as I finished reading my mother's embarrassing comment, my personal cell phone lit up on the desk. It was a direct text message from Jasmine. She had finally unblocked my number just to gloat about her viral fame. I opened the message and read her arrogant words with a calm smile. She wrote that I was completely finished, and that the entire world now knew exactly what kind of horrible person I really was. She demanded that I immediately transfer the $200,000 to her account, or she would personally send the viral video to my boss and have me fired from my boring little accounting job by the end of the day. She honestly believed she had backed me into a corner. She thought the pressure of thousands of angry strangers on the internet would completely terrify me into giving up my money. She was acting like a high school bully who had just won a popularity contest, but she was severely underestimating the woman she was dealing with. I did not feel an ounce of fear or panic. Instead, I took a clean, high-definition screenshot of her threatening text message. By putting her explicit extortion demand in writing right after posting a viral video full of malicious lies, she had just handed my legal team the final piece of evidence we needed to completely destroy her. I forwarded the clear screenshot directly to Mitchell with a single strict instruction. I told him to add the text message to the growing pile of evidence for the massive defamation lawsuit we were building against her. Let her enjoy her 15 minutes of internet fame, I thought to myself. Because very soon, the only audience she would be performing for would be a strict civil judge in a very quiet courtroom. I placed my phone face down on the desk and went back to my multi-million-dollar acquisition contract, completely unbothered by her digital tantrum. Later that afternoon, I decided to disconnect from the digital noise completely. I booked a private session at an exclusive luxury spa located right on the top floor of a high-end hotel downtown. While my brother and his furious bride were desperately refreshing their social media pages, counting their virtual likes, and reading angry comments from strangers, I was wearing a plush white robe and sipping cold cucumber-infused water. The atmosphere was incredibly peaceful, with soft instrumental music playing quietly in the background. I sat back on a heated stone lounge chair, overlooking the bustling city below, feeling completely relaxed and untouched by the drama. My secure phone rang softly from the small wooden table next to me. It was Mitchell calling from the office. He was calling to give me another legal update on the situation. The ridiculous video Jasmine had posted earlier that morning had now officially crossed 5 million views across various platforms. Some low-tier internet gossip blogs had even started writing short articles about the cruel rich sister, who maliciously ruined a beautiful luxury wedding. Mitchell sounded slightly concerned over the phone. He asked if I wanted his elite public relations team to issue a standard corporate denial just to protect my professional image and the reputation of the firm. I took a slow sip of my water and told him absolutely not. I explained my long-term strategy to him very clearly. I told Mitchell that we were going to let them keep screaming into the digital void. We were going to let Jasmine do countless internet interviews and let my mother post as many angry rants on her own social media pages as she wanted. Mitchell was a brilliant lawyer, and he immediately understood exactly where my mind was going. In a high-level civil lawsuit for corporate defamation, the financial compensation awarded by a judge is directly tied to the quantifiable scale of the public damage. If Jasmine had just yelled at me in a private room, she would legally owe me nothing. But by publicly broadcasting malicious lies that directly threatened the reputation of a massive private equity firm, she was exponentially increasing the financial penalty she would eventually have to pay. Every single view, every single share, and every angry comment generated by her pathetic victim video was just adding another zero to the final lawsuit amount. She was demanding a ridiculous $200,000 in her amateur extortion email, thinking she was incredibly smart. But the corporate damages my legal team could easily calculate from a massive viral smear campaign against a multi-billion-dollar investment firm would easily reach $5 million. She was literally digging her own financial grave and proudly live-streaming the entire process to the whole world. She was the absolute perfect prey. I told Mitchell to simply continue archiving every single public post, every threatening email, and every single text message they sent us. We were not going to interrupt our enemies while they were busy destroying themselves. I ended the phone call and closed my eyes, letting the soft, warm air of the spa wash over me. I had exactly 5 days left until Ryan's massive secured loan officially defaulted. Until then, I was going to enjoy every single peaceful minute of my day. Exactly 24 hours after Jasmine's ridiculous extortion email arrived, the official legal response from my firm was physically delivered. I did not send an angry email or a text message. Real Power does not argue over the internet. Real Power uses a licensed process server wearing a sharp suit, knocking firmly on your front door. According to the detailed report I received from Mitchell later that afternoon, the delivery was absolutely flawless. Ryan and Jasmine were currently staying at an overpriced luxury apartment they could barely afford. At exactly 2 in the afternoon, a loud, firm knock echoed through their hallway. Ryan opened the door wearing expensive silk pajamas, looking completely exhausted from staying up all night reading his own social media comments. The professional courier asked to confirm his legal identity. Ryan proudly stated his full name, probably expecting a fan or a delivery of free gifts from his brand new internet followers. Instead, the man simply handed him a thick, heavy envelope sealed with the official gold foil crest of Mitchell's elite corporate law firm and walked away without saying another word. Ryan tore open the heavy envelope right there in the open doorway. He probably thought it was a desperate legal settlement offer from me begging for his forgiveness to save my career. But what he pulled out was a formal demand for immediate payment. The legal document was printed on thick premium paper and drafted with cold, terrifying precision. The letter clearly stated that due to his explicit breach of the secured promissory note, the entire principal balance of $120,000 was now completely due. The document broke down the exact financial figures, including the daily accumulating penalty interest that he had foolishly agreed to when he blindly signed the contract. But the most important part of the demand letter was the strict timeline printed boldly at the very bottom of the final page. Mitchell had given him exactly 7 days to wire the full amount directly to my corporate holding account. 7 days. Not a month, not a year. 1 single week. The letter explicitly warned that if the massive funds were not fully cleared by the exact deadline, my legal team would instantly move to execute the collateral clause. There was no room for negotiation and absolutely no friendly family discount. The language used in the letter was deliberately sterile and legally bulletproof, completely stripping away any illusion that this was just a simple sibling rivalry. This was a massive corporate entity demanding its money back from a failing financial debtor. You cannot pay a legally binding corporate debt with social media likes or viral video views. I watched my personal phone screen light up a few minutes later with frantic incoming calls from Ryan's number. I simply blocked his contact information entirely and went back to my corporate work. The countdown clock had officially started, and my brother had exactly 168 hours left before his entire fake life completely collapsed. Ryan closed the heavy apartment door and walked back into the modern living room. Jasmine was sitting on the expensive velvet sofa, filing her nails and pretending she was not completely stressed about their current financial situation. She looked up and casually asked him who was at the door. Ryan let out a loud, arrogant laugh and tossed the thick legal envelope onto the glass coffee table. He confidently told her it was probably just another pathetic attempt from my lawyers to scare them, or maybe I had finally cracked under the intense social media pressure and sent a formal written apology. He walked over to the kitchen island and poured himself a glass of sparkling water, acting like he was a powerful executive completely in control of the situation. He walked back, picked up the heavy premium paper, and started reading the first few paragraphs out loud in a highly mocking tone. When he read the words, "formal demand for immediate payment," he actually rolled his eyes. He told Jasmine that his sister was completely delusional if she thought a stupid piece of paper was going to make him pay for a ruined wedding. He firmly gripped the edges of the document, fully intending to rip it in half and throw it in the trash, just to show his new bride how little he cared about my corporate threats. But right before his hands pulled the thick paper apart, his eyes caught a bolded section near the middle of the second page. The legal heading clearly read, "Secured Collateral Execution Clause." Ryan stopped laughing instantly. The arrogant smirk completely melted off his face, leaving behind a pale mask of sheer terror. He quickly put his glass of water down on the table so hard that the water splashed over the rim. He pulled the paper much closer to his face, his eyes frantically scanning the dense, undeniable legal text. According to the strictly binding document, if the massive debt of $120,000 was not paid in full, within exactly 7 days, the corporate law firm was legally authorized to instantly seize the designated physical asset. His terrified eyes darted down to the specific property address listed clearly on the formal contract. It was not his expensive sports car. It was not his worthless tech startup company. It was the exact address of the large suburban family home where our mother Brenda currently lived. When Ryan was sitting in my apartment begging for the wedding money 3 months ago, he was incredibly desperate. He had secretly used a forged power of attorney document to pledge our mother's house as the primary collateral for the massive loan. He had done it completely behind her back, utterly convinced that he would eventually pay me off when his fake business finally took off. He thought no one would ever find out about his massive illegal fraud. Now the undeniable reality of his criminal actions was staring him right in the face. His hands started to tremble violently, making the thick legal paper shake loudly in the quiet living room. He realized with absolute horror that my corporate lawyers were not just bluffing. If he did not magically find $120,000 in exactly 1 week, we were going to legally take his mother's house, and she would discover his massive betrayal. Jasmine dropped her nail file and asked him what was wrong, her voice suddenly laced with genuine panic. But Ryan could not even form a single coherent sentence. He just stood there shaking as his entire fake world finally began to collapse around him. Jasmine stood up from the velvet sofa and walked toward him. She crossed her arms and demanded to know why he was suddenly sweating and staring at a piece of paper like he had just seen a ghost. Ryan quickly folded the thick legal document and shoved it aggressively into his pants pocket. He forced a fake smile and lied right to his new bride's face. He told her it was absolutely nothing important, just some standard legal jargon from my lawyers trying to scare them into dropping the defamation lawsuit. Jasmine let out a loud, annoyed sigh and turned around, walking back to the sofa. She complained bitterly that she was supposed to be drinking expensive cocktails on a private beach in the Maldives right now, instead of being trapped in an apartment with a stressed-out husband. As she continued to rant about her ruined luxury honeymoon, Ryan tuned her voice out completely. His heart was pounding so hard against his chest he felt like he was going to pass out right there in the living room. He slowly walked into the guest bathroom and locked the door behind him. He pulled the crumpled demand letter out of his pocket and stared at the property address again. A sickening wave of pure guilt and absolute panic washed over him. 3 months ago, when he was desperately trying to secure the wedding money, he had secretly gone into our mother's home office. He had found a blank power of attorney form in her filing cabinet. He had carefully forged her signature and used a fake notary stamp he bought online. He then used that completely illegal document to officially pledge her beloved family home as the primary collateral for the massive $120,000 loan. He had done it because he was completely convinced that his tech startup was going to explode in value. He honestly believed he would pay me back before anyone ever found out about his massive financial crime. He thought he was a brilliant businessman making a strategic move. But now the terrifying reality of his actions was crushing him. If he did not magically produce the full payment in exactly 7 days, my corporate legal team would legally execute the lien and take ownership of the house. Our mother Brenda would receive a formal eviction notice. She would find out that her perfect golden child had secretly stolen her only valuable asset and committed serious felony fraud just to pay for a luxury wedding party. Ryan splashed freezing cold water on his face, trying to stop his hands from violently shaking. He gripped the edges of the porcelain sink and stared at his own miserable reflection in the bathroom mirror. He was supposed to be a highly successful tech chief executive officer. He had spent years meticulously building an arrogant fake persona completely fueled by our mother's endless praise. But looking into his own terrified eyes, he finally saw the pathetic truth. He was nothing but a fraud who had literally stolen the roof over his own mother's head just to impress a woman who only loved him for his imaginary bank account. He could not tell Jasmine the truth under any circumstances. She had already thrown a massive public tantrum over the cancelled flights. If she found out she had married a broke criminal who forged legal documents, she would instantly file for a highly publicized divorce. And he absolutely could not confess this massive crime to our mother Brenda. She worshipped the ground he walked on, but she loved that house more than anything else in the world. He had to figure out a desperate way to magically generate $120,000 in cash before the strict 7-day deadline expired. The countdown clock was loudly ticking in his head, and the walls of his fake life were rapidly closing in. By 9 o'clock the next morning, Ryan was completely out of options. The terrifying reality of his forged collateral was eating him alive. He knew he had to confront me directly before the strict 7-day deadline expired. He convinced his mother and his furious wife to drive downtown with him to force my hand. Brenda confidently led the charge, completely convinced that she still held all the ultimate power in our family dynamic. During the entire car ride, she loudly bragged about how she was going to march right into my little accounting office and put me in my proper place. She told Ryan and Jasmine that she would simply demand to speak with my direct manager. She fully planned to threaten a massive public scene in front of my coworkers unless I immediately canceled the family debt and publicly apologized for ruining the wedding. They navigated to the official address printed at the top of the legal demand letter. They were fully expecting to find a depressing gray building or a cheap strip mall office block. Instead, Ryan parked the car and they found themselves standing on a pristine sidewalk, staring straight up at a massive 70-story glass skyscraper. It was located right in the absolute center of the most exclusive financial district in the city. Brenda frowned but refused to let her arrogant confidence slip. She pushed through the towering revolving glass doors and marched into the building. Jasmine and Ryan followed closely behind her. They stepped into a breathtaking lobby constructed entirely of imported black marble and polished steel. Dozens of highly successful corporate professionals in custom-tailored suits walked past them holding briefcases and speaking quietly on their phones. The sheer wealth and power radiating from the building was incredibly intimidating. Jasmine suddenly crossed her arms, looking down at her designer clothes and feeling entirely out of place. Ryan was sweating profusely, his eyes darting toward the heavy automated security gates. But Brenda was completely blind to her sophisticated surroundings. She was a woman on a mission to destroy her disobedient daughter. She stomped straight up to the massive glowing reception desk and slammed her hand down on the smooth marble surface. A tall, imposing security guard, in a sharp suit, looked down at her, completely unbothered by her aggressive behavior. Brenda loudly demanded that he call up to the junior accounting department and tell Lauren to get down to the lobby right this second. She proudly announced that she was my mother, and she was absolutely not leaving the building until I came down to face her. The highly trained security guard did not flinch or roll his eyes. He did not call for a mid-level human resources manager. He simply looked at his glowing computer screen and typed my name into the directory. He looked back up at Brenda with perfect professional stoicism. He politely asked if she meant Miss Lauren, the chief executive officer and majority shareholder of the private equity firm that currently occupied the top 3 floors of the skyscraper. Brenda froze instantly, her mouth hanging slightly open. Jasmine let out a sharp, confused gasp. Ryan felt his stomach completely drop to the floor. The guard calmly picked up his secure phone to announce their arrival to my private executive suite. The heavy steel doors of the private executive elevator slid open with a soft chime. Brenda stepped out first, completely expecting to find a miserable little accounting department filled with gray cubicles and cheap fluorescent lighting. Instead, she walked directly into a massive glass-walled reception area that looked like something out of a billionaire lifestyle magazine. The floors were polished white marble, and the walls were decorated with expensive modern art. A team of highly dressed executive assistants sat behind a sleek curved desk working quietly on high-end computers. Jasmine walked out of the elevator next, and her breath completely caught in her throat. She recognized the sheer wealth of the environment immediately. The designer furniture, the custom lighting, and the hushed, respectful tone of the office were undeniable. She slowly turned to look at Ryan, hoping he would explain what was happening, but her new husband looked like he was about to physically throw up on the expensive marble floor. His face was completely drained of color, and his hands were shaking violently at his sides. A senior executive assistant in a sharp, tailored suit stood up immediately and gestured toward a massive set of frosted glass double doors at the end of the hallway. She did not ask for their names. She simply told them that the chief executive officer was expecting them and instructed them to walk straight ahead. Brenda swallowed hard, her arrogant confidence finally starting to crack, but she stubbornly marched down the long hallway. Ryan and Jasmine followed closely behind her, feeling more like prisoners walking to their execution than family members paying a casual visit. As they walked past several open-glass meeting rooms, highly paid financial analysts and corporate directors looked up from their documents. They saw the 3 messy, panicked visitors, but said absolutely nothing. Suddenly, a senior vice president walked out of a side office holding a thick portfolio. He looked directly past Brenda and nodded respectfully toward the large double doors at the end of the hall. "Good morning, boss," the man said clearly and respectfully to the person sitting inside. Brenda pushed the heavy glass doors open and stepped into the corner executive suite. The room was larger than her entire suburban house. It featured massive floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the entire city skyline. And sitting right in the center of the room behind an enormous custom mahogany desk was me. I was wearing a pristine white designer suit, leaning back in my leather chair with my hands resting calmly on the polished wood. My mother froze completely dead in her tracks. Her jaw literally dropped open as her eyes frantically scanned the luxurious room and then locked onto my face. She tried to speak, but absolutely no sound came out of her mouth. Jasmine stepped into the room behind her and immediately felt a cold, terrifying chill run down her spine. The pathetic spinster sister she had relentlessly mocked and humiliated was not an accountant. She was sitting in the chairman's seat of a multi-billion-dollar financial empire looking down at them like they were nothing more than an annoying insect on her shoe. Jasmine finally realized with absolute horror that she had picked a fight with a woman who could destroy her entire life with a single phone call. The heavy glass doors closed behind them, creating a completely soundproof seal against the busy office outside. The massive executive suite was perfectly quiet, except for the ragged, panicked breathing coming from my brother Ryan. My mother Brenda stood completely frozen in the center of the luxurious room for a few long seconds. Her eyes desperately darted around, taking in the expensive modern art, the custom designer furniture, and the breathtaking panoramic view of the city skyline. She looked back at me sitting calmly in the massive leather chairman's seat, and her brain simply could not process the reality of the situation. Instead of realizing she was completely outmatched, Brenda stubbornly fell back on the only tactic she knew. She desperately tried to reestablish her false authority as the powerful matriarch of the family. She took a deep breath, puffed out her chest, and marched aggressively toward my desk. She slammed her hand down hard on the polished mahogany wood. The loud sound echoed sharply across the room, but I did not even blink. She pointed a shaking finger directly at my face and ordered me to stop this ridiculous little legal prank right this second. She raised her voice loudly, acting like I was still a terrified teenager living under her roof. She demanded that I immediately call my lawyers and cancel the completely fake $120,000 debt. She then pointed back at Jasmine, who was standing nervously near the door, and ordered me to issue a formal public apology on the internet for ruining her perfect wedding day. Brenda leaned over my desk, trying to look as intimidating as possible, and offered me what she genuinely believed was an incredibly generous deal. She told me that if I dropped the lawsuit and gave them the money, she would graciously allow me to come back into the family. She promised to forget all about my terrible behavior and let me attend family dinners again. She actually thought the privilege of being her daughter was worth giving up a massive financial asset. She honestly believed I was still starving for her toxic validation and that I would happily surrender just to hear her say she loved me. Jasmine started to regain a tiny bit of her arrogant confidence, seeing my mother take charge. She stepped forward and loudly agreed, demanding that I also pay for her ruined honeymoon as compensation for her emotional distress. Ryan remained completely silent, standing rigidly in the corner of the room, with sweat pouring down his face. He knew the debt was real, and he knew exactly what asset he had illegally pledged to secure it. He was too terrified to speak up and stop his mother and his wife from making the situation infinitely worse. I sat perfectly still and let them finish their completely delusional demands. I did not raise my voice or show a single ounce of anger. I slowly stood up from my executive chair and walked around the massive desk until I was standing directly in front of my mother. I looked down at her with absolutely zero emotion in my eyes. I spoke in a quiet, freezing cold voice that made her instantly step back. I told her she was no longer in her tiny suburban kitchen where her screaming actually mattered. I told her she was standing in my corporate headquarters and the legal demand letter she received was absolutely not a prank. I did not waste a single breath arguing with her delusional demands. Instead, I casually reached across my polished mahogany desk and picked up a small silver remote control. I pressed a single button, and the heavy automated blackout blinds silently descended over the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, plunging the executive suite into near-total darkness. A large high-definition projector screen smoothly dropped down from the ceiling right behind my desk. My mother stopped mid-sentence, her angry expression quickly fading into deep confusion. Jasmine took another nervous step back toward the heavy glass doors. Ryan just stared at the blank white screen, his eyes wide with a sudden terrifying realization that I was always 10 steps ahead of them. I pressed another button on the remote, and a crystal-clear video began playing on the massive screen. The hidden camera footage was recorded exactly 1 month ago, right inside my mother's own suburban living room. I had quietly installed top-tier security cameras in her house a few years ago to protect the property because she lived alone. She completely forgot they were even there, but they recorded every single word spoken in that room. On the massive screen, my mother Brenda and my new sister-in-law Jasmine were sitting comfortably on the floral sofa, casually sipping hot tea. The audio quality was absolutely flawless, echoing loudly through the silent executive suite. On the video, Jasmine was laughing mockingly. She clearly stated that Ryan was incredibly gullible and completely desperate for female attention, making him the absolute perfect easy target for a quick marriage. She bragged about how easy it was to convince him to spend massive amounts of money on her luxury lifestyle. But the video quickly got much worse. My mother leaned forward on the sofa and smiled wickedly at Jasmine. She told Jasmine to just play the perfect loving wife for a few more months until they could secure full access to my private bank accounts. My mother then laid out her ultimate terrifying plan. She calmly explained that because I was a single unmarried woman who worked long, stressful hours, they could easily fabricate a fake medical history. She wanted to hire a corrupt private doctor to officially declare me mentally unstable and legally unfit to manage my own finances. Brenda excitedly told Jasmine that once I was locked away in a private mental institution, they would gain total legal conservatorship over my entire financial empire. They planned to completely drain my private equity firm, sell off all my massive commercial real estate assets, and split the massive fortune between themselves, leaving Ryan completely in the dark. The video ended, and the heavy blackout blinds slowly rose, letting the bright city sunlight back into the room. The silence in my office was absolute. Ryan stood frozen in the corner, staring at his beloved mother and his beautiful new wife. The two women who claimed to love him more than anything else in the world had just been completely exposed as ruthless predators planning to steal his sister's fortune and leave him with absolutely nothing. Jasmine was shaking uncontrollably, and my mother looked like she was about to physically collapse. The heavy silence in the office was finally broken by the sound of Ryan taking a shaky, breathless step forward. He slowly turned his head away from the blank projector screen and looked directly at the two women he had trusted more than anyone else in the world. His eyes were wide with a mix of absolute heartbreak and sheer terror. He looked at his mother Brenda, the woman who had spent his entire life telling him he was a golden child, destined for greatness. Then he looked at Jasmine, the beautiful bride who had whispered promises of true love and a perfect future together. Ryan asked them in a broken, completely hollow voice if the video was real. He asked if their entire relationship and the wedding had just been a massive, calculated setup to steal his sister's money. Brenda immediately stepped forward, reaching her hands out toward her son. She frantically shook her head and tried to spin the narrative like she always did. She told Ryan that the video was taken completely out of context and that she was only trying to protect his future from a selfish, ungrateful sister. But her voice lacked its usual arrogant confidence. She was stammering and sweating profusely, completely unable to look Ryan directly in the eyes. Jasmine, however, reacted entirely differently. The sweet, innocent bride persona she had so carefully maintained for the past year completely evaporated into the cold air of the executive suite. Seeing that she was cornered and that the ultimate source of wealth was actually sitting behind the mahogany desk, Jasmine dropped the act. She looked at Ryan and let out a harsh, cruel laugh. She told him to stop acting like a pathetic victim. She crossed her arms and explicitly stated that she only married him because he constantly bragged about his massive tech startup and his endless bank accounts. She looked Ryan up and down with pure, absolute disgust. She told him that he was nothing but a gullible, arrogant fool who could not even afford to buy his own wedding cake without begging his sister for cash. Jasmine practically spit the words at him, revealing her true nature as a cold, calculating gold digger who had zero romantic feelings for him whatsoever. She loudly declared that she wasted an entire year pretending to care about his boring business ideas just to secure a luxury lifestyle. Ryan took another step back as if he had just been physically struck. His entire fake world was crumbling around him in real time. The brilliant tech executive image he had built was completely destroyed. The unconditional love from his mother was exposed as a manipulative financial scheme. The beautiful wife he worshipped was standing right in front of him, calling him a worthless, broke joke. I sat quietly in my leather chair, watching the inevitable destruction of their toxic alliance. They had spent years treating me like absolute garbage, and now they were tearing each other apart right inside my office. Ryan was still staring at Jasmine, completely shattered by her cruel confession, but I was not finished dismantling his fake reality. I reached into my heavy mahogany desk drawer and pulled out a thick black leather folder. I tossed it casually across the polished wood. It slid perfectly across the smooth surface and stopped right in front of him. The gold-embossed letters on the cover spelled out the exact legal name of his tech startup company. Ryan slowly looked down at the folder and then looked back up at me, his eyes full of absolute confusion. He asked me how I managed to get my hands on his highly private corporate financial records. I leaned forward, resting my arms on the desk, looking at him like he was a complete fool. I told him he really needed to start reading the legal documents he signs. I asked him if he remembered the massive angel investment firm that suddenly swooped in and saved his failing startup exactly 3 years ago. The mysterious investment firm that he constantly bragged about to our mother and all of his friends. The firm that provided all the capital so he could buy expensive tailored suits, rent a luxury apartment, and pretend to be a highly successful young chief executive officer. Ryan nodded slowly, his brain still not putting the obvious pieces together. He proudly stated that Apex Global Investments believed in his brilliant vision and funded his entire operation. I smiled, a completely cold and merciless smile. I told him that Apex Global Investments was nothing more than a ghost. It was a completely empty shell company created by my own corporate legal team. I told him that I was the mysterious angel investor. I was the silent board member who approved his monthly operating budget. I was the person who paid for his luxury lifestyle, his expensive sports car, and the very clothes he was wearing right now. I had quietly funded his pathetic little company for 3 solid years because our mother kept crying to me that he was going to end up homeless if his business failed. She had begged me to help him, but insisted he could never know the money came from me because his fragile ego could not handle it. So I bought his worthless company through a proxy just to give the family some peace. For 3 entire years, I sat at family holiday dinners and listened to him brag endlessly about his brilliant business mind. I listened to my mother proudly compare him to massive tech billionaires while telling me I should really try to be more ambitious like my brother. I watched him buy expensive watches using my money while simultaneously telling me my boring accounting job was a dead end. I paid for his entire fake life while he treated me like absolute garbage. The remaining color completely drained from Ryan's face. His knees actually buckled, and he had to grab the edge of my desk just to stay standing. He looked like he could not breathe. His entire identity as a brilliant self-made entrepreneur was a complete lie funded out of sheer pity by the sister he constantly mocked. Jasmine stared at the black folder, her eyes wide with shock. She realized the husband she just brutally insulted was entirely dependent on the woman sitting behind the desk. Ryan tried to formulate some kind of apology, but his voice completely failed him. The crushing weight of reality finally broke him. He was a complete fraud, and I held every single string. I did not give Ryan any time to process the massive bomb I had just dropped on his fragile ego. I picked up the thick, black leather folder from the polished mahogany desk and flipped it open to the final page. I looked directly into his terrified eyes and delivered the final, fatal blow to his fake tech empire. I told him that as the sole majority investor of Apex Global Investments, I held the absolute legal right to withdraw my financial backing at any given time without providing any prior notice. I informed him that exactly 1 hour before they walked into my building, I had officially signed the executive corporate order to completely dissolve the entire funding structure for his pathetic startup. I had already contacted the primary corporate bank and permanently frozen every single business account tied to his company name. I looked down at my expensive watch and calmly told him that his platinum corporate credit cards were currently declining all over the city. His expensive downtown office lease was officially terminated as of this morning. His tiny staff of 3 people had already been given their generous severance packages by my human resources department, and they were sent home for good. Ryan let out a pathetic, choked gasp that echoed loudly in the quiet executive suite. He reached his hands out and desperately grabbed the edge of my heavy desk, pleading with me to stop. He begged me to reconsider, telling me that he just needed 1 more month to officially launch his new software application. He promised me with tears streaming down his face that he would pay back every single dime he owed me if I just gave him a little more time to succeed. I just sat there looking at him with absolute disgust. I reminded him that his software application was a complete useless joke that had not generated a single dollar of actual profit in 3 entire years. I told him he was absolutely not a brilliant chief executive officer, and he never was. He was just a spoiled, arrogant little boy playing business with his sister's hard-earned money. I told Ryan that his company was officially bankrupt effective immediately. He had absolutely 0 financial assets, 0 generated revenue, and 0 future business prospects. I made sure to outline exactly what this meant for his immediate future. The luxury penthouse apartment he and Jasmine were currently renting was paid directly through the corporate expense account, which meant the landlord would be handing them an eviction notice by the end of the week. The expensive imported sports car he loved showing off to his friends was leased under the company name, and my legal team had already scheduled the physical repossession for tomorrow morning. Jasmine let out a sharp, furious scream. The horrifying reality finally set in that the glamorous, wealthy lifestyle she thought she had successfully secured was completely gone. She was now legally married to a broke, unemployed fraud who had absolutely nothing. She turned to Ryan and started violently shoving his shoulder, calling him a worthless liar and a massive, miserable failure. My mother Brenda covered her face with her trembling hands, completely unable to watch her precious golden child lose everything he had in a matter of seconds. Ryan slowly fell to his knees right there on my expensive office rug, sobbing uncontrollably as the illusion of his perfect life completely shattered into a million unfixable pieces. The sound of Ryan sobbing on my expensive office rug finally snapped my mother out of her frozen state. She dropped her trembling hands from her face and stared at her completely broken golden child. Her shock quickly morphed into absolute explosive rage. She could not accept that her perfect son was a massive financial failure, and she certainly could not accept that her quiet, obedient daughter was the one pulling all the strings. Brenda stomped her foot hard against the floor and marched right up to the edge of my mahogany desk. Her face was flushed dark red, and the veins in her neck were bulging as she prepared to play what she honestly believed was her ultimate trump card. She pointed a furious, shaking finger directly at my face and began screaming at the top of her lungs. She yelled that I was a cold, heartless monster who was completely dead to her from this exact second onward. She loudly declared that I was officially kicked out of the family forever and that I was never allowed to step foot inside her home again. She screamed that she was calling her estate lawyer the very minute she left my building to completely rewrite her last will and testament. She proudly announced to the entire room that she was going to leave her beautiful, beloved suburban house entirely to Ryan, and that I would never inherit a single brick of that precious property. Brenda stood there panting heavily, looking down at me with pure toxic hatred. She honestly expected me to instantly burst into tears and beg for her forgiveness. She thought the terrible threat of losing my childhood home and being permanently exiled from her life would finally break my cold exterior. She truly believed that her old suburban house was a massive grand prize that I desperately wanted to secure for my own future. She thought she was stripping away my last remaining connection to a wealthy legacy. I just leaned back in my custom leather chair and stared at her, feeling absolutely nothing but pure dark amusement. I did not raise my voice or show any sign of fear. I slowly let a cold, mocking smile spread across my face. The absolute hilarious irony of her screaming threat was almost too perfect to be real. She was desperately trying to use that house as a weapon to punish me completely, unaware of what her precious golden boy had secretly done just a few months ago in her own home office. Ryan suddenly stopped crying when he heard her mention the house. His head snapped up and his wet face turned the color of pure white ash. He knew exactly what was about to happen next. He reached a violently shaking hand out toward his mother and weakly begged her to stop talking. He desperately tried to pull her away from my desk, but Brenda angrily shook him off. She proudly repeated her threat, telling Ryan not to worry, because she would make sure he always had a beautiful home to live in, no matter what happened with his company. She looked at him with such fierce maternal love, completely blind to the absolute terror in his eyes. She had absolutely no idea that the very house she was trying to use to destroy my life was the exact same property Ryan had already signed away. I let my cold, mocking smile linger for a few more seconds before I finally decided to end her pathetic delusion. I opened my bottom desk drawer and pulled out a single thick red folder. I placed it gently on top of my polished mahogany desk, right next to the bankrupt company file. I looked directly at my mother, Brenda, and asked her if she actually remembered what happened exactly 5 years ago. I reminded her of the massive economic recession that had completely destroyed our family finances. The bank was literally days away from legally foreclosing on her precious suburban home. She had cried for weeks, terrified of the public humiliation and the reality of being thrown out onto the street. Then a sudden financial miracle happened. An anonymous real estate holding company stepped in at the very last second and purchased the property directly from the bank. They sent her a formal letter allowing her to stay in the house completely rent-free. My mother nodded her head, her face twisting with deep confusion. She proudly stated that a generous corporate investor had saved her beautiful home. She angrily asked me what that ancient history had to do with our current situation. I slowly shook my head and tapped my manicured finger on the heavy red folder. I told her there was absolutely no generous corporate investor. I told her that I was the anonymous buyer. 5 years ago, I used my very first massive private equity bonus to secretly purchase the exact same house she was currently using to threaten me. I bought it through a protective shell company because I knew her fragile ego would never allow her to accept charity from the daughter she constantly considered a complete failure. I opened the red folder and slid the original certified property deed across the desk. The legal document clearly showed my personal holding company as the absolute sole owner of the entire estate. I looked my mother directly in her eyes and delivered the ultimate crushing truth. I told her she did not own a single brick or a single blade of grass on that property. She was nothing more than a non-paying guest, living completely on my secret charity for the past 5 years. She had absolutely no legal right to leave the property to Ryan in her will, because it was never hers to give away. The sudden horrifying realization hit her like a physical blow to the chest. Her mouth opened and closed repeatedly, but no words came out. The arrogant matriarch who had spent my entire life looking down on me suddenly realized she was essentially a charity case living entirely by my grace. I looked over at Ryan, who was still kneeling on the rug. I told him his massive financial fraud was even more pathetic than I initially thought. He had illegally forged a power of attorney document for a woman who did not even own the collateral he was trying to mortgage. The property deed sitting on my desk proved that I was the actual landlord all along. I owned the house my mother lived in, and I owned the massive debt my brother created. They were completely at my mercy. The crushing reality of the property deed completely paralyzed my mother. She stared at the red folder on my desk, as if it were a venomous snake. All those years of her bragging to her wealthy country club friends about her beautiful suburban estate were nothing but a massive, embarrassing lie. She had spent half a decade living under my roof, eating at my table, and sleeping in my house while treating me like an absolute miserable disappointment. But I was not done dismantling her perfect, arrogant life. I calmly reached into my center desk drawer for the absolute last time today. I pulled out a single crisp white envelope and placed it directly on top of the red property folder. I looked at Brenda and told her that living in my house rent-free came with a few very specific legal conditions. I explained that my holding company had a strict morality and harassment clause written into every single residency agreement. I told her that a tenant absolutely cannot publicly defame, threaten, or conspire to commit massive financial fraud against the legal owner of the property. By participating in Jasmine's viral social media hate campaign, and by sitting in my own living room plotting to lock me in a mental institution, she had violently breached the terms of her residency. I tapped my perfectly manicured fingernail against the white envelope. I told her in a completely flat and emotionless voice that this was her official 30-day notice of eviction. My corporate legal team had already filed the necessary legal paperwork with the City Housing Authority earlier this morning. I looked her directly in the eyes and laid out her new terrifying reality. I told her she had exactly 1 month to pack up her expensive clothes, her fake jewelry, and her massive arrogant ego. She had 30 days to vacate my property completely. If she was still inside the house on the 31st day, I would have the local city police department physically remove her and throw her belongings out onto the front lawn for the entire neighborhood to see. Brenda let out a horrible, agonizing gasp. She reached her shaking hands toward the desk, trying to grab the white envelope, but her fingers were trembling too much. She looked at me with heavy tears streaming down her wrinkled face, and finally begged for mercy. The proud, powerful matriarch was suddenly crying like a terrified, helpless child. She pleaded with me, asking where she was supposed to go and how she was supposed to survive. She cried that she was an older woman who knew absolutely nothing about renting cheap apartments or finding a minimum wage job. I just stared at her, completely unmoved by her sudden theatrical tears. I pointed a finger toward Ryan, who was still weeping silently on my expensive office floor. I told Brenda she should probably ask her brilliant golden child for a place to stay since she loved him so much. I reminded her that because of his massive financial failure, they were both officially broke and completely homeless. I calmly pressed the security intercom button hidden under my desk and told them their meeting was officially over. Just as my finger released the security intercom button, the heavy glass doors of my executive suite swung open. Mitchell, my lead corporate attorney, walked confidently into the room. He was wearing his usual impeccably tailored suit and carrying a thick leather binder under his arm. He completely ignored my sobbing mother and stepped right past my brother, who was still kneeling helplessly on the rug. Mitchell had only one specific target in mind this morning. He walked straight toward Jasmine, who was standing frozen near the back wall. She was still trying to process the horrifying fact that she had just married a completely broke and homeless fraud. Mitchell stopped directly in front of her and pulled a massive stack of official legal documents from his binder. He held them out with a cold, professional expression. Jasmine instinctively took a step back, shaking her head, but Mitchell simply dropped the heavy papers right into her trembling hands. I leaned forward in my chairman's seat and looked at my terrified new sister-in-law. I told Jasmine that she should have listened when I warned her about the consequences of her viral internet fame. I calmly explained that the paperwork she was currently holding was a formal civil subpoena and a massive corporate lawsuit. I reminded her about the pathetic little video she live-streamed in my building lobby. I told her that by publicly broadcasting malicious lies to millions of strangers and falsely accusing me of financial abuse, she had directly attacked the reputation of a massive private equity firm. I watched the remaining color completely drain from her face, turning her skin a sickly pale white. I explained that in the corporate world, reputation is worth actual money. My financial analysts and legal team had spent the entire morning calculating the exact monetary damage her stupid viral video had caused to my professional image and my company. I told her the final calculated number was exactly $5 million. Jasmine let out a weak, pathetic gasp, and the heavy legal documents slipped from her hands, crashing loudly onto the polished floor. I told her she was being sued personally for every single penny of that $5 million. I made sure she understood that she could not hide behind Ryan because he was officially bankrupt and could not afford a lawyer to defend her. She was entirely on her own against a team of ruthless corporate attorneys. I told her that we would freeze her personal bank accounts, seize her expensive designer wardrobe, and aggressively garnish any future wages she might ever earn for the rest of her miserable life. Jasmine looked at the scattered papers on the floor with wide, terrified eyes, realizing her life was completely over. She had tried to play the role of the innocent victim to destroy my career, but instead, she had single-handedly destroyed her own future. Mitchell stepped back and politely informed her that she had exactly 20 days to file a formal legal response with the city court before we asked the judge for an automatic default judgment. The heavy silence in the room was finally broken by a sharp intake of breath from Jasmine. She stared at the $5 million lawsuit scattered across the polished marble floor and then slowly shifted her gaze toward her new husband. The man she thought was a wealthy tech genius was still kneeling weakly on the rug, crying like a miserable child. He had no company, no money, and not even a rented apartment to his name. She realized with absolute clarity that she was now legally chained to a massive financial black hole. All her dreams of luxury vacations, designer clothes, and a high society lifestyle had instantly evaporated into thin air. In their place was a mountain of legal debt and the promise of endless public humiliation. The sweet, innocent mask she had worn for an entire year completely fell off her face. Jasmine let out a piercing scream of pure frustration and charged directly at Ryan. Before he could even stand up to defend himself, she swung her hand and slapped him incredibly hard across the face. The loud crack of her palm hitting his cheek echoed sharply against the glass walls of my executive suite. Ryan fell backward onto the floor, clutching his red face in total shock. Jasmine did not stop there. She stood over him, pointing a shaking finger at his face, and began screaming a tidal wave of vicious insults. She called him a pathetic liar, a worthless, broke fraud, and a disgusting parasite. She screamed that she was contacting a ruthless divorce lawyer the very second she left this building to get an immediate annulment. She loudly declared that she would rather be dead than spend another minute married to a penniless loser who had to beg his sister for survival. Ryan reached out his hand, begging her to calm down and promising that he could somehow fix this massive mess. But Jasmine just kicked his hand away with her expensive designer heel, completely disgusted by his weakness. Seeing her precious golden child being physically assaulted and verbally destroyed on the floor finally pushed my mother over the edge. Brenda forgot all about her own eviction notice and lunged forward to protect her son. She grabbed Jasmine by the shoulder and violently yanked her away from Ryan. Brenda screamed right into Jasmine's face, calling her a greedy, selfish gold digger and a terrible wife. She blamed Jasmine for everything, claiming that her expensive taste and her constant demands for a luxury wedding were the only reasons Ryan had to borrow the money in the first place. Jasmine aggressively shoved my mother backward, laughing right in her face. Jasmine screamed back that Brenda was a delusional old woman who had spent her entire life raising a completely useless son. She mocked my mother for being a homeless charity case who did not even own the roof over her own head. The two women who had sat in a cozy suburban living room just a month ago, plotting to lock me in a mental institution, were now viciously tearing each other apart right in front of my desk. They pushed and shoved each other, screaming horrible, toxic secrets and exposing every single lie they had ever told. It was the ultimate display of absolute betrayal. I simply sat back in my custom leather chair, rested my chin on my hands, and watched the beautiful chaos unfold. I did not need to lift a single finger to destroy them, because they were doing it perfectly to each other. The violent screaming match had become so loud that it could be heard clearly through the heavy soundproof glass doors. Just as Jasmine raised her hand to slap my mother, the heavy executive suite doors violently burst open. 4 large building security guards rushed into the room, followed closely by 2 uniformed city police officers. My lead attorney, Mitchell, had quietly called law enforcement the moment Ryan confessed to the forged collateral documents. The police officers immediately stepped between the 2 screaming women and forced them apart. Jasmine kicked and thrashed wildly, screaming that she was the victim and demanding that they arrest her husband instead. One of the officers grabbed her arms and firmly placed her in cold metal handcuffs, reading her rights regarding assault and corporate trespassing. Brenda tried to resist the officers, crying hysterically and demanding that they release her because she was a respected suburban homeowner. The police ignored her completely and placed her in handcuffs as well, telling her to remain silent. Two other officers hauled Ryan up from the floor. He did not fight back or say a single word. He looked completely dead inside a hollow shell of a man whose entire fake reality had been permanently crushed. They handcuffed him tightly, informing him that he was being officially detained for questioning regarding massive felony fraud and forged legal documents. The police officers began marching the three of them toward the exit. Jasmine was crying and cursing loudly, her designer clothes ruined and her reputation completely destroyed. Brenda was sobbing uncontrollably, her head hanging down in absolute shame. Ryan just dragged his feet, looking at the floor as they led him away. I stood up from my desk and walked slowly toward the glass doors to watch them leave. The entire office floor of highly paid financial executives and corporate analysts had stepped out of their offices to watch the massive spectacle. My family was paraded through the pristine marble hallway in handcuffs, completely humiliated in front of the very people they had tried to look down upon. They were shoved into the heavy steel elevator, and the doors finally closed, sealing their fate. The toxic noise that had plagued my entire life was finally gone, leaving behind nothing but the quiet, peaceful hum of my multi-billion-dollar financial empire. I turned around, walked back to my desk, and smoothly opened my laptop to resume my workday. Exactly 3 months passed in absolute, blissful silence. The toxic noise that had plagued my entire life was completely gone, replaced by the steady, quiet hum of my growing financial empire. I was sitting at the massive mahogany desk in my penthouse home office, enjoying a cup of expensive dark roast coffee, when my secure phone softly buzzed. It was a scheduled message from my lead corporate attorney, Mitchell. He had sent me a direct link to a brand new social media video. But this time the setting was entirely different. There was no luxury hotel lobby, no fake tears, and no arrogant demands. Jasmine was sitting in a dark, cramped bedroom with cheap gray painted walls. She was not wearing her expensive designer clothes or her flawless professional makeup. She wore a plain, wrinkled cotton shirt, and her face was incredibly pale and exhausted. Her hair was pulled back into a messy knot, and her eyes looked completely dead. I clicked the play button and leaned back in my custom leather chair to watch the final destruction of her massive ego. She looked directly into the camera lens and began to read from a legally mandated script drafted entirely by my ruthless corporate attorneys. She stated clearly and slowly that every single word she had spoken about me in her previous viral videos was a complete and utter lie. She publicly confessed to fabricating the entire malicious story out of pure greed and deep personal jealousy. She admitted to the entire internet that I was a highly successful private equity chief executive officer, and that she had maliciously tried to extort me for a massive sum of money. She formally apologized to me, to my company, and to her millions of followers for being a manipulative, calculating fraud. Mitchell had made the legal ultimatum crystal clear to her defense team. If she did not post this exact apology video on every single social media platform she owned and leave it permanently pinned to the top of her profiles, we would immediately proceed with the $5 million defamation lawsuit and crush her into absolute bankruptcy. She cowardly chose the public humiliation to save herself from complete financial ruin. I watched the live viewer count climb rapidly as her followers tuned in to witness her ultimate downfall. Her comment section instantly turned into a massive wave of pure disgust. Her fans aggressively turned against her, calling her a scammer and a liar. Every single brand deal and corporate sponsorship she had desperately cultivated over the years was permanently canceled within a matter of hours. Her glamorous internet career was entirely dead, and her reputation was permanently destroyed. The apology video was not her only massive failure. She had quickly filed for an emergency divorce the very week after the police escorted them out of my corporate building. She hired an aggressive lawyer and demanded massive monthly alimony payments and exactly half of all their marital assets, hoping to somehow squeeze a final paycheck out of my brother. But the ruthless family court judge simply laughed at her ridiculous demands. Ryan had absolutely zero assets, zero income, and zero future prospects. The only things he legally possessed were massive mountains of high-interest corporate debt and a completely ruined credit score. Jasmine walked out of the divorce courtroom with absolutely nothing. She had wasted an entire year of her life playing a calculated game of deception only to win the grand prize of absolute poverty. And then there was my brilliant brother Ryan. The former chief executive officer of a fake tech empire could not handle the crushing public humiliation in his home city. The moment the police officially released him from holding after his massive fraud investigation, he packed whatever cheap clothes he had left into a plastic trash bag and fled across the country on a cheap midnight bus ticket. My private investigators easily tracked him down to a tiny, miserable desert town 3 states away. He was no longer wearing custom-tailored Italian suits or driving expensive leased sports cars. According to the latest detailed investigator report, Ryan was currently working the overnight shift at a rundown roadside diner. The arrogant man who used to confidently order $500 bottles of champagne was now wearing a stained polyester uniform and a cheap plastic name tag. He spent his long, miserable nights wiping down sticky tables, serving greasy plates of food to angry truck drivers, and desperately hoping for a few crumpled dollar bills and tips. Every single penny he earned went straight to the aggressive collection agencies that were mercilessly hunting him down for his maxed-out personal credit cards. He lived in a tiny rented room above a loud mechanic garage, entirely isolated from the luxury world he used to desperately claim as his own. There were no more golden child praises from our mother to inflate his fragile ego. There were no more fake investors secretly funding his expensive delusions. There was only the harsh, brutal reality of a minimum wage paycheck and the endless heavy weight of the massive financial ruin he had built with his own 2 hands. I closed the investigation report on my laptop and took another slow sip of my coffee. The city skyline outside my penthouse window looked more beautiful than ever. I smiled warmly, completely at peace, and went back to managing my empire. When the strict 30-day eviction notice finally expired, my mother Brenda had absolutely no choice but to pack her bags. She had no secret wealth and no wealthy friends willing to take her in. The massive, beautiful suburban estate she proudly claimed as her own was locked behind her for the very last time. My private property management team immediately changed all the high-tech security codes and hired a professional cleaning crew to throw out the useless junk she left behind. Brenda was forced to move into a tiny, depressing apartment complex located on the absolute worst side of the city. The building was ancient and crumbling with peeling gray paint on the walls and a constantly broken elevator that smelled like garbage. There were no perfectly manicured green lawns or friendly, wealthy neighbors hosting expensive weekend garden parties. There was only the loud, obnoxious noise of heavy city traffic and the harsh, terrifying reality of her brand-new poverty. Her new living space was incredibly cramped and smelled faintly of old smoke. She could barely fit a small, cheap fabric sofa and a tiny television inside the dark living room. The kitchen appliances were heavily outdated and covered in stubborn stains. It was a massive, humiliating downgrade from the custom-imported marble countertops and luxury stainless steel ovens she had enjoyed for 5 entire years completely on my dime. She spent her first few nights sitting alone on a cheap, uncomfortable mattress, crying bitterly into the dark, empty room. She had spent her entire adult life looking down her nose at people who lived in places exactly like this. She used to sit at her elite country club drinking incredibly expensive wine and mocking anyone who was not part of the upper crust of society. Now she had become exactly what she hated the most. She was a completely broke, isolated, and miserable old woman with absolutely nothing to her name. After a week of sitting in total silence, desperation finally pushed her to reach out to our extended family members. For decades, Brenda had aggressively positioned herself as the generous, wealthy matriarch of the entire family tree. She had constantly bragged to her sisters and cousins about her perfect golden son and his massive fake tech fortune. Now she sat in her tiny, rundown apartment, desperately dialing their phone numbers one by one. She planned to play the ultimate victim card once again. She wanted to cry to her older sister and tell a completely fabricated dramatic story about how her cruel, jealous daughter had illegally stolen her house and thrown her out onto the cold street. She fully expected them to immediately pity her and offer her a comfortable spare bedroom and a warm home-cooked meal. But her cheap cell phone just kept ringing endlessly. No one picked up the line. She dialed her older sister, Martha, then her younger brother, Thomas, and even her distant cousins who lived out of state. Every single call went straight to a cold, automated voicemail message. The undeniable truth had already spread through the entire family network like a massive, uncontrollable wildfire. They had all seen the humiliating viral apology video that Jasmine was legally forced to post online. They had all read the highly public court records detailing Ryan's massive financial fraud and his completely forged power of attorney documents. Most importantly, the extended family now knew exactly what Brenda and Ryan had secretly plotted to do to me. They knew all about the hidden security camera footage and her cruel, terrifying plan to lock me inside a mental institution just to steal my corporate fortune. The entire family was absolutely horrified and completely disgusted by her pure, toxic greed. None of them wanted anything to do with a woman who would ruthlessly conspire to destroy her own highly successful daughter just to spoil a lazy, arrogant son. They completely blocked her phone number and permanently removed her from every single family group chat. There were no warm invitations to upcoming holiday dinners or casual weekend family gatherings. When she tried to physically visit her sister Martha, the older woman simply refused to open the front door and threatened to call the local police if Brenda did not leave the porch immediately. All her expensive country club friends had completely abandoned her the exact second her monthly membership dues bounced. She was entirely cut off from the outside world. Brenda was finally forced to face the brutal, heavy consequences of her lifelong favoritism and endless manipulation. She tried calling Ryan, begging him for emotional support, but the golden child she sacrificed everything for was too busy flipping greasy burgers in a miserable desert town, and he completely ignored her calls. The daughter she maliciously tormented was a multimillionaire who legally evicted her and moved on without a single second thought. Every single day, she woke up in that depressing little apartment and stared at the cracked ceiling, realizing that she had built her own miserable prison brick by brick. She was left entirely alone with her bitter regrets and the crushing reality of knowing she threw away a perfect life of luxury just because she could not stop feeding her son's massive ego. The toxic cycle was permanently broken, and she would spend the rest of her days paying the ultimate painful price for her sheer arrogance. The final closing papers for the suburban estate sat neatly on my massive mahogany desk. Exactly 4 months had passed since the violent confrontation that permanently severed my toxic family ties. I did not feel a single ounce of sadness or regret as I picked up my expensive fountain pen to sign the documents. The large, beautiful house that my mother had used as a fake symbol of her massive wealth was now completely empty. My private real estate agents had moved incredibly fast. They staged the property perfectly and listed it on the competitive luxury market. It sold in less than 2 weeks to a lovely young couple who actually appreciated the architecture and had absolutely no connection to the dark, miserable history of my family. I signed my name on the final dotted line, officially transferring the property deed over to the new owners. The heavy burden of that house was finally lifted from my shoulders forever. The massive sum of money from the real estate sale was instantly wired directly into my primary corporate holding account. It was a highly profitable investment, but the financial gain was completely secondary to the emotional relief. By selling that house, I was permanently erasing the last remaining physical footprint my mother and my brother had in my life. There were no more shared assets, no more hidden collateral, and absolutely no more strings attached to my future. I closed the thick leather folder and pushed it aside, feeling a deep, profound sense of absolute freedom wash over me. The morning sun was pouring through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse executive suite. The city below was bustling with intense energy, But up here in my private sanctuary, everything was perfectly still and incredibly peaceful. I stood up from my leather chair and walked over to the glass, taking a deep, quiet breath. For my entire life, I had been aggressively conditioned to believe that I was a completely worthless supporting character in my brother's grand imaginary story. I was taught that a good daughter silently sacrifices her own future to fund the massive, arrogant ego of the golden child. I had spent years hiding my brilliant financial success behind dull gray suits and a fake, boring accounting job just to protect myself from their endless greed. But that miserable, fearful version of Lauren was completely gone. I was the chief executive officer of a multi-billion-dollar private equity firm. I was a highly respected leader in the financial district, and I had ruthlessly protected my empire from the very people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. The heavy, toxic noise of my mother constantly demanding money, and my brother endlessly bragging about his fake achievements, had been entirely replaced by the quiet confidence of my own undeniable success. I walked back to my desk and sat down, ready to begin the most important project of my entire professional career. The heavy glass doors of my office opened smoothly, and my lead corporate attorney Mitchell walked in. He was holding a brand new stack of legal documents, but this time there were no eviction notices or massive defamation lawsuits. He placed the crisp white papers gently on my desk and offered me a warm, genuine smile. Mitchell and my elite legal team had spent the last 3 months secretly working on a massive passion project that I had personally designed. I looked down at the official documents and felt a powerful surge of pure pride. It was the formal legal charter for a brand new philanthropic foundation, entirely funded by my private wealth. I had decided to take the massive profits from the sale of my mother's old house and use them to permanently endow a specialized financial scholarship program. The mission of the foundation was incredibly specific and deeply personal to my own painful journey. It was designed to actively protect and support young women who were currently suffering from severe financial abuse and manipulation at the hands of their own toxic families. I knew exactly how terrifying it felt to be a young woman forced into crushing debt just to please manipulative parents. I remembered the dark, sleepless nights trying to figure out how to escape the massive financial traps my family had deliberately set for me. My new foundation would provide massive educational scholarships to help these young women achieve total financial independence. It would offer them completely free access to top-tier financial advisors who would teach them how to safely build and protect their own wealth. But most importantly, the foundation would provide a ruthless team of corporate lawyers to help them legally untangle themselves from abusive family members who were trying to steal their money or force them into fraudulent loans. We were going to set up a dedicated legal hotline where young women could call and get immediate representation against parents who illegally ruined their credit scores or brothers who stole their inheritance. I wanted to make sure that no other girl ever had to sit in a quiet room and figure out how to outsmart a family that viewed her as nothing more than a free bank account. I picked up my pen again and looked at the primary signature line. By creating this massive fund, I was ensuring that hundreds of intelligent, ambitious young women would never have to endure the terrible financial hostage situations I had barely survived. They would have the exact corporate armor and legal protection that I had to brutally build for myself from the ground up. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name with absolute authority. Mitchell gathered the executed documents and nodded respectfully, promising to file them with the state authorities by the end of the afternoon. He told me that the entire legal department was incredibly proud to work on this specific initiative. As Mitchell left the office, closing the glass doors behind him, I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. The painful chapter of my past was officially closed. The miserable people who tried to destroy me were living the exact lives they truly deserved. And I was moving forward using my massive power and wealth to build a much better, safer future for others. The healing process was finally complete. I watched the heavy glass doors close behind Mitchell and the absolute silence of the room wrapped around me like an unbreakable shield. For the first 30 years of my life, I was completely suffocated by the heavy expectations of a toxic bloodline. I was constantly told from a very young age that family was the absolute most important thing in the universe. I was taught that sharing the same last name meant I had to silently endure endless disrespect and massive financial extortion. Society aggressively conditions young women to be the quiet peacemakers and the eternal caregivers. We are deliberately taught to shrink our own ambitions so that the fragile egos of the men in our families can comfortably expand. My mother spent decades building a massive religious shrine to her golden son while actively treating her highly successful daughter like a miserable unpaid servant. But sitting here today in the chairman's seat of a multi-billion-dollar financial empire, I finally understand the greatest truth about human relationships. Blood does not automatically make you family. Blood simply makes you a biological relative. Real family is not a heavy iron chain that drags you down into financial ruin and emotional depression. Real family is supposed to be a solid foundation of mutual respect and absolute loyalty. If the people who share your DNA are constantly plotting to steal your hard-earned wealth and manipulate your natural kindness, they are absolutely not your family. They are simply dangerous parasites hiding behind the highly convenient mask of a biological connection. I had to become a completely ruthless predator just to survive the very people who were supposed to unconditionally protect me. I had to build a massive fortress of corporate lawyers and encrypted offshore bank accounts just to keep my own mother from locking me inside a private mental institution. That is the terrifying hidden reality that so many highly successful independent women face every single day behind closed doors. We are heavily punished for our financial success, and we are instantly demonized when we refuse to hand over our hard-earned paychecks to lazy, entitled relatives. When I finally cut the financial cord and let my brother and my mother completely drown in their own massive failures, society would probably call me a cold, heartless monster. But I wear that specific title with absolute pride. Being called a monster by a group of toxic manipulators is the absolute highest compliment an independent woman can ever receive. It means you are completely unbreakable. It means they can no longer control you with fake theatrical tears and pathetic emotional guilt trips. True power is looking your abusers right in the eye, showing them the door and locking it forever without shedding a single tear. I built my massive corporate fortune with my own two hands, working brutal 80-hour weeks, while my brother played video games and my mother planned his luxury fake life. I earned every single penny in my bank account, and I will fiercely protect it from anyone who tries to claim it as their own. The greatest revenge you can ever get against the people who tried to destroy you is to simply survive, thrive, and become completely untouchable. To every single woman watching or listening to my story today, I want you to hear my words very carefully. You absolutely do not owe your beautiful life to people who treat you like a disposable stepping stone. You do not ever have to apologize for your massive success, and you absolutely do not have to shrink your vibrant personality to make other people feel comfortable. Your money belongs to you. Your future belongs to you. Protect your mental peace and aggressively protect your bank accounts. If you are currently dealing with a toxic family member who constantly demands your money, disrespects your personal boundaries, and treats you like a secondary character in their life, it is time to legally and emotionally evict them from your universe. Do not wait for them to magically change, because greedy, entitled people will only change their manipulative tactics, never their actual hearts. They will just find new creative ways to drain your energy and steal your resources. You have to be the one to finally break the toxic cycle. You have to be the one to stand up and say that the financial abuse completely stops right here and right now. Build your own massive empire, secure your own wealth, and lock the heavy steel doors right behind you. Do not ever feel guilty for choosing your own survival over their endless greed. If my personal journey from a financially abused daughter to a ruthless billionaire chief executive officer inspired you today, I need you to make your powerful voice heard. Hit the like button right now to show your absolute support for the unstoppable power of independent women everywhere. Leave a comment down below and share your own personal stories of cutting off toxic family members or overcoming financial abuse so we can continue to build a massive global community of strong, unbroken survivors. We need to normalize walking away from biological relatives who do nothing but cause us pain. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications so you never miss another empowering story of absolute corporate revenge and ultimate financial liberation. Share this exact video with every single woman you know who desperately needs the courage to finally stand up and take her entire life back from the people pulling her down. The long, miserable era of the quiet, obedient victim is officially over. Welcome to the brand new era of the untouchable empire. The ultimate lesson to take away from this entire story is the absolute importance of fierce financial independence and uncompromising personal boundaries. We are often taught from a very young age that family is a sacred bond that must be protected at all costs. Society expects us to constantly forgive and unconditionally support the people who share our biological DNA, even when those exact same people are actively destroying our mental health and draining our hard-earned resources. But this story violently shatters that dangerous illusion. True loyalty is built on mutual respect and genuine care, not on a simple biological technicality. When you work incredibly hard to build your own success, you instantly become a massive target for entitled people who want to skip the painful struggle and simply steal the final reward. Toxic family members will constantly use emotional manipulation and deep-rooted guilt to treat you like a personal automated teller machine. They will aggressively demand your money, your valuable time, and your energy while offering absolutely nothing but pure disrespect in return. You must urgently learn to recognize financial abuse, especially when it comes directly from inside your own childhood home. You have to fully understand that saying no to a greedy, entitled relative does not make you a bad person at all. It makes you a highly intelligent survivor. Protecting your massive wealth and your personal peace of mind is your absolute highest priority in this life. You have to build a strong legal and financial fortress around yourself to block out the users and the manipulators. Never allow anyone to illegally sign documents in your name or emotionally guilt you into taking on their massive personal debts. You must be completely willing to walk away from highly toxic environments, even if it means leaving your own biological family permanently behind. Your beautiful success is your own, and you owe your brilliant future to absolutely no one but yourself. If you are finally ready to take absolute control of your financial destiny and cut ties with toxic manipulators, hit the subscribe button right now and share your own powerful survival story in the comments below.